As you may well know, Walter Crist is a lecturer at Leiden University Center for the Arts in Society. He is by training an archaeologist specializing in games of ancient West Asia and the Mediterranean world, with a particular interest in the Bronze Age. He's the lead author of the book Ancient Egyptians at Play, Board Games Across Borders, and has conducted game-related research in Cyprus, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Egypt, Greece, and the Netherlands. He compiled the Ludi database of traditional games and is currently the vice chair of GameTable. And what's really exciting about today is that it's a collaborative project. And as a result, we also have Aslan Gasimov, who serves as a research fellow in the archaeology department of the National Museum of History of Azerbaijan. I had the great pleasure of working with Aslan for many years. So it's great to see him kind of being involved in GameTable. And in addition to his expertise in museum studies, Aslan specializes in field archaeology. He delivers lectures on archaeology, Azerbaijani and world ethnology at several universities across Azerbaijan. And he has also worked as a supervisor or project leader on various initiatives and field projects, including the study of Gobustan rock art, the archaeological exploration of Barda, which is where I was lucky enough to meet him, and the Leyla Tepe culture. He's also a member of the GameTable network. Over to you guys, please, in your own time.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Tim, and welcome to everybody else for coming. So we wanted to present this, the results of this research, as Tim mentioned, which was the outcome of an STSM that I took in Azerbaijan in between July and August for 3 weeks, and went there to research both the ancient and current heritage of games in Azerbaijan. So maybe some of you don't know much about Azerbaijan. It's not a country you hear about every day in Western Europe or in the United States. But here's a map of it. You can see it borders, Russia borders it to the north, Iran to the south, Georgia also to the north, Armenia to the west. You have the capital city of Baku, where we spent much of our time. But we also traveled throughout much of the country and talked to people from who talked about games from pretty much all parts of the country. We also, in particularly, traveled to, you see that little bit in the southwest that is separate from the rest of the country, the Autonomous Republic of Nakhchivan, where we also spent quite a bit of time looking for games. The kind of inspiration for this STSM was based on my previous research in Azerbaijan. I had traveled there in 2018 to study this Bronze Age game that you see here, the game known as 58 Holes. You might sometimes hear it called Hounds and Jackals, which was a game that was played in Egypt and throughout West Asia in the Middle Bronze Age in particular, but was also played through the Iron Age. And the Neo-Assyrians, for example, really liked this game. But it's a game that was played in Azerbaijan and had some very interesting and unique local forms of it that had not been seen elsewhere. And it was played by the mole pastoralist populations that were living in the Middle Bronze Age at the time. So it was interesting. And also, when I was working as part of the digital looting project and compiling the Ludi games database, which was compiling traditional games from all around the world, from prehistory to the modern day, I was particularly interested in trying to find some kind of games that were from Azerbaijan to include in this database that were more recent than 58 Holes, but I really couldn't find much. I found this game called Mertuchdu in an ethnographic report from the 1960s. That was an incomplete description of a Mancala-style game, but there really was nothing else in the literature. And from having been in Azerbaijan, I knew that there were other games. I had seen people playing backgammon and stuff, and I knew other things were going on. So I wanted to know more, basically. And so basically we went into this STSM with the idea of doing archaeological, ethnographic, and historical research. So we went to look for games graffiti and other potential gaming artifacts in museums or that people had found in excavations there. we wanted to look at what modern people, people today were playing in Azerbaijan. So, and we did that by observing people who were playing games, but also talking to people who knew how to play games, who maybe didn't have the equipment with them, ready to play. So we kind of talked to them and found out how they played them. But also we wanted to look at do some, or at least find some sources to do historical research, because there are a lot that are published in Azerbaijan and not really disseminated as much to libraries around the world and are not accessible. So we wanted to find sources there that we can consult for other kinds of historical periods, other ethnographic evidence, and so forth. And so now I'll hand it over to Aslan.
Thank you for giving a few. Firstly, I would like to thank all attendees of the webinar, and I will start with my impressions about the games and study of it, actually. Firstly, I found the study mentioned or traditional games rather illogical. However, as I started reading and thinking more about the topic, I realized that traditional games hold a fascinating place in human development. Therefore, when I came across the GameTable cost action, I seized the opportunity to join, connect with European researchers in this field, and seek support for studying traditional games in Azerbaijan. After our meeting in Cappadocia, Turkey, as you see in the slide here, Walter and I had extensive discussions on these topics. We decided that Walter would visit Azerbaijan, and together we would conduct a survey. So our survey started in 19th July and continued till the 10th of August. We were in several regions in Azerbaijan, as Walter mentioned. But firstly, we traveled to Salyan city, which is my hometown, and there we observed my father and my brother playing backgammon, what we call nard or sheshbesh. Actually, in Azerbaijan, we have three types of backgammon, which we called nard or sheshbesh, döyme, and gülbahar. Typically, nard and domino are played in tea houses across the country. Yes, here in the slide, you'll see Walter and my father in the first one, and in the right one, we are in the tea house. We are in the tea house, but actually we were only guests in tea house because it was really hot at that time. As I said, in Azerbaijan, nard and domino are mostly played in tea houses. However, as we were in Salyan for a short time, it was hot day, and we couldn't meet anybody in the tea house playing these games. After Salyan, we returned back to Baku, and the next day we went to Gobustan area. Next slide, yeah, we are in Gobustan with our friends. So when discussing Gobustan, I need mention that Gobustan National Historical Artistic Reserve is my first workplace, and I have always been captivated by the magnificence of this site. Here we encountered carvings and engravings that depicted various games played by shepherds. Also, as Walter mentioned, he was in Gobustan, and they did a research about 58 hole games. During our survey in Gobustan, our friends Rafael and Sevin joined us to examine petroglyphs in the Zingirdagh and Böğüçtaş mountains, which might represent games. This project was my first survey related to games, so I tried to learn as much as possible from Walter. I carefully observed the process of recording games, photographing them, and the questions posed to individuals. In addition to Gobustan, we also visited Gala village in Absheron region. It's also near Baku city, where we met archaeologist Idris Aliyev, who provided information about some game petroglyphs he had discovered. Furthermore, we gathered information about Söfken game. In the next 2 slides, we have photos about Söfken game. It's a traditional equestrian game, and we collected information from Rafael. He is a resident of Shahsevan village in Alzabadi district of Azerbaijan. Before our meeting, we we visited and watched Söfken championship, Azerbaijan Söfken championship. And after that, Rafael provided extensive information about Söfken and other equestrian games, explaining their history, systematization, and other details such as rules of the games. After this, we traveled to Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic. Nakhchivan is a remarkable region known for its history, archaeology, and ethnography. Organizing this trip was somewhat challenging as special permission was required to enter the Autonomous Republic. For this purpose, I had to request authorization from the region's leadership. Additionally, Walter provided 2 separate letters to the chairman of the Nakhchivan division of National Academy and to the rector of Nakhchivan State University, seeking their assistance. Another difficulty was that Nakhchivan could only be accessed by the airplanes, air routes. Despite these obstacles, the people of Nakhchivan, like in other regions, welcomed us warmly. First day we met with the vice rector and department heads of Nakhchivan State University. Later, Julfara Ahmedova, she's the head of the department in the university. She invited us to the Sharur district to observe the traditional Yallı dance. In the next slide, we can see one photo from this dance. In Sharur, we had an enjoyable day. And after this, in next photo, you can see us collecting uzarlich. It's, I don't know its English name. I searched, it was rue seeds. And Latin name is peganum, this plant. And rue seeds are traditionally used in our culture to ward off the evil eye for this. So making them highly popular among the local population. And it was interesting that when we were driving the car, Julfara stopped the car and asked us to collect this plant for her. On the way back, we visited the Karabağlar Mausoleum. In the next slide, in the left picture, we can see this mausoleum. And in the right picture, we see the mausoleum of Memne Hatun. She was the queen of the Atabey Eldaci's dynasty, which were based in Nakhchivan in 12th century. Additionally, Julkhara accompanied us to the Alinze castle, but due to time constraints, we couldn't explore the site for potential game-related carvings. So in Nakhchivan area, Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, we also visited Ordubat city, known for preserving its historical architecture. We supposed that some games might have left traces on the pavements, but unfortunately we didn't find any. After meeting other researchers, friends, conducting interviews and gathering information about games, we returned back to Baku. And yeah, here in this slide, we actually met the rector of Nakhchivan State University, and he was speaking about his childhood and how they were playing Lotto game. And here he was showing us how they were playing this game. So it was last day in Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic. After this, we come back to Baku. So when talking to people, they strongly recommend us visiting Shaki and Gabala, suggesting that different games might exist in those regions. So we traveled to Shaki. Firstly, in Shaki, we visited the ancient Kish Albanian church and the Jalasan Jorasan fortress. In next slide, in the left, we see the remains of Jalasan or ruins of Jalasan Jorasan castle. But in the right one, it is the church inside the Shachi Khan's palace. And we tried to collect information about the games in Shachi area. However, an interesting event occurred on our way from Shaki to Gabala. Walter spotted what appeared to be a farm and suggested revisiting it to gather better information about games. The next day, after visiting the Christian church in Nids village, where the Udi people reside, in the next slide, we have the picture of church in Nids. They are supposed to be the Albanians who are now living in Gabala area in one village. So we visited them, and we visited Antik Gabala city site. After that, we traveled to the location Walter had marked on the map. There we met shepherds who shared their childhood memories of playing traditional games, such as Marachostu, Tulunjagat, and also they were playing Nerd, as you see in this photo. Interestingly, in that area, people call themselves mostly Mughals or lesbians. So I asked them which one are you? They said that we are not from this region, we are from Karabakh region, and we moved here and now living in this region. So it was also interesting that these guys, shepherds, were talking about their how to say childhood memories, how they were playing these games, but there was some misinformation in their information. So after talking these guys, we had nothing to do there, so we came back to Baku, started research in library for like to find some literature about the games in Azerbaijan. They are mostly about the ethnography. Here in Azerbaijan, this type of things are considered as ethnography. So we find some books or articles about the ethnography where also games were included. So it's brief about our travel or STSM in Azerbaijan. So I think Walter will continue about this. Thank you for listening.
All right. Thanks, Aslan. So okay, let me talk about what we found. So at the Gobustan Preserve, there is this site, which is a rock shelter that was occupied mainly in the Middle Bronze Age by pastoral cattle herders who would spend the winters here in Gobustan and then go for the summers into the mountains. At that, back in the Bronze Age. This is actually the site where the 58 holes game was, but I remembered seeing another strange pattern there. And as you can see in the photos here, that it was a very overcast day, kind of unusual for August in Azerbaijan, or July, I think it was at the time. So it wasn't great for photos, but I have kind of highlighted some of the, I have improved the photos in some cases so you can actually see the pattern. You can sort of see here the unusual pattern under question that I identified, but you can see it better here where I have put dots where the actual holes are on the ground. So it's this kind of single track that has 72 depressions in almost a spiral, almost 3 rows, some kind of circuit. I don't know how to describe that shape. It's not a game pattern that I recognize from any other place, but it certainly is a pattern that could have a game played on it. We have lots of different kinds of games that have a single track. On the right here, you can see where the black and white scale is just under, it's in the same spot in both of the photos. But then if you look a little bit, almost in the center of that photo, you can see a pen lying on the ground, and that's where the 58 holes game board actually is. So in the context of being so close to this other game, and it's highly suggestive that this could also have been some kind of game board, but we just don't know, what game it may have been. At another site in the Gobustan Preserve, Jingirdag, there is, Jingirdag is the big mountain you see in the background there, but just nearby it, there is this stone that is kind of sitting there in the middle of this flat area that stands about waist high. And you can see on it that there are a series of depressions on there, and some of them that are actually quite large. The scientists at Gobustan have actually done some research in this part and done some really nice photography and scanning and drawing of some of the monuments in this part of the preserve, and you can see some of their work here. But basically, you have a series of depressions on here that are suggestive of at least one board game that we know of, and so I've indicated them here on slides. In the next slide here, with the boxes. The more solid the line, the more sure I am that it probably is a game board. So you have you have the 2 rows of 7, which is a common Mancala style game board, which is found throughout West Asia. And then you have kind of 2 patterns, which could be 3 rows of 3, on which you could play a version of what we call a Merrill's game, which is basically a more complicated version of tic-tac-toe, where you place each person has 3 pieces, you place them, and then after you place them, if no one's won yet, then you move them until someone wins the 3 in the row. I think that the top left one is more cohesive and suggestive as a pattern to possibly be this. The one in the middle, because it has all these other holes around it, is a little bit more questionable, but possibly could also be that. And it's also interesting to note that this stone, you can maybe see it a little bit. You can see them a little bit on the right-hand photo here. It's covered in these symbols called tamgas, which are associated with the medieval period. in Azerbaijan, and particularly are seen a lot in Gobustan itself. So we know people were coming here in the medieval period. It's also interesting to note that it seems to still be a place where people come to stop. As we arrived at this rock, there were a bunch of plastic water bottles right next to it. So someone had kind of stopped there to take a break. A pretty good place where one might, sit and play a game, or stand and play a game, because it is kind of at waist height. At another one of the sites in the Gobustan Preserve, Yazılıtepe, up on top of this, you see that big rock that is inclined, that is standing very high. Up at the top of that, there were these two patterns that you can see circled on the left-hand side, in the left-hand photo. And again, using the scanning and drawing that was done by the scientific staff at Gobustan, you can see that there are two circular patterns here. One has 12 holes in the pattern in the circle, the other has 9, and each one has the one with 9 has one larger hole in the center. The one with 12 has 3 holes in the center, which is a little bit odd. But you can also see that there's a lot of other graffiti on this stone. You can see, especially in the photo on the right, that there are goats, which are associated with the Bronze Age, but then you can also see that there's graffiti in the Cyrillic alphabet, so that's probably from Soviet times. Also on the Buyukdash terrace, which is one of the other mountains in the Gobustan Preserve, which is near the Chapmali rock shelter, there is this very distinctive, what we call in English 9 Men's Morris pattern, or actually this might be 12 Men's Morris because it has the diagonals on it. This is a game which which is very well known all around the world, and has been for quite some time now. It doesn't seem like people still play this in Azerbaijan. We don't know anybody that knew it, but what's interesting about this is this is actually not a playable version of the game because it's on a vertical rock surface. There you can see it on the stone. You can see the 23 that was put there by the first archaeologist who was studying the Gobustan Preserve, who numbered the stones like this. But there's also some goats off to the left, if you look closely, which are petroglyphs that are associated with the Bronze Age. So it's kind of hard to say when specifically this game may have been put there, or this pattern, I should say, because you couldn't have played this as a game, but someone must have known the game in order to put it on this surface. So we know that the Gobustan Preserve is particularly known for its petroglyphs and has been occupied, and people have been putting petroglyphs on there since the Mesolithic period, all the way up until very recent times, as you've seen the Cyrillic graffiti that's there. So it's really hard to place it. It's probably this game seems to appear in late Roman times, so sometime after that. We do know that the Romans were there. There isn't actually the easternmost Latin inscription, in situ Latin inscription, is actually here at Gobustan as well. Who knows who put it there at this point. In some of our research, we found that there are some archaeologists who were working at the site of Tigranakert, which was a big Armenian city in the Middle Ages in what is in the Karabakh region. So there were excavations done there, and they didn't show the game board that they found, but they described it very clearly as this shape and this game, as found in this kind of rock cut occupation, which included a church, and it can be dated to the 11th century. So maybe that gives us an indication of around when people were playing this game in the area. But you can see it's a little bit different. It doesn't have the diagonals connecting the corners like the one in Gobustan does. Also, on the top of Buyukdaş Mountain, there was this pattern here that was on the flat surface, in kind of a nice location overlooking the plain below, which is a pattern that's not directly and has not really been identified before specifically as a game board, but it reminded me of something I had seen before, which you can see very faintly in this photo here. This is actually on the railing of the gallery, so the second floor or first floor, if you're using European floor nomenclature, of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, which has Nine Men's Morris graffiti on it, but also has this kind of wheel pattern. Whether this is a game or not, I don't know. It's associated with other games in Hagia Sophia. It's in a place where people would play games or could play games here in Gobustan. So maybe it is, but we can't definitively say at this point. But game boards aren't the only archaeological things that could point to gameplay. So we also found references and then were able to look at these actual objects. So for those of you who may not be archaeologists, these are broken pieces of pottery that have been shaped to be circular. And 26 of these were found together in a building next to a fireplace. And so while you can use this kind of an artifact for a lot of different things, I know that when I was working at previous archaeological sites, we often interpreted them as jar lids. So like for little tiny jugs, you could put it on top as a lid. But finding 26 of them in the same place is really suggestive of something else. And I would suggest it could even, it might even suggest that they were used as game pieces. And this is in the Middle Bronze Age, the same time period when the game of 58 holes was being played not too far away. And we also found some references to other sites in Azerbaijan that have similar things, such as these from the 3rd millennium, which are really highly suspicious looking things that look very much like game boards. We didn't see these, or game pieces, sorry. We didn't actually see these pieces ourselves, but the article that referenced these really also talks about several other sites that have objects that are like this. So it may very well be possible that there are many more of these to be seen in other places. And finally, for the archaeological side of things, in the National Museum in Aslan's museum, they have these two very interesting dice from the 6th or 7th century from Mingachevir, which have some unique things about them. First of all, there's that really big one. You can see for scale how it looks in comparison to the other objects that are around it, but it's also not just your ordinary 6-sided die, because instead of a 6 you have an 11 on the die, but then also the smaller one, which is of a more normal size, you're missing the 2 and have a blank side on it. So it probably is not unfinished. It probably was meant to be left blank. So that's another interesting fact, an interesting feature of the archaeology of games in Azerbaijan. So moving into the ethnographic side of things. So as Aslan already kind of mentioned, backgammon is kind of the most popular game that is played today in Azerbaijan. Well, we're not talking about chess really in this. Azerbaijan has a really strong chess culture. It's part of the curriculum when you're growing up. They have whole schools for chess that we saw in even some of the smaller towns that we went to. There are chess schools. So chess is a huge thing that we didn't really address in this research. But backgammon was a main focus. And so in Azerbaijan, it's called nard takhta, which literally means wooden nard. which comes from the Persian taxa nard, which is originally from Nardshir, which is the original name for this game, which does originate in Sasanian Persia. One interesting thing about the board is that you see it does have the points that we're used to seeing in Western Europe, but they are not but all of backgammon boards don't always have these points in Azerbaijan. And you can see the little sockets that are around the perimeter where the pieces fit in, and you'll see this a little bit more clearly in some of the later photos. But this is a style of board that goes back a long time, and some of the earliest depictions of backgammon boards that we have from Europe, including these from the Libro de los Juegos from the 13th century, have this kind of pattern. So it's a very old style of board. As Aslan mentioned, Seshbesh, which is the most commonly played version of this game. This is how the pieces start on the board. It's different. It's quite different from how people play normally in Western Europe and a lot of other places, because there's no hitting. So you can't land on your opponent and then knock them back to start like you normally would. The goal is the same, to get all of your pieces around the board and then to bear them off. And you usually play until someone gets 3 points. The same game is also known as uzun nard, which means long nard, and this is how they call it in the Nakhchivan region of Azerbaijan. Doime, which Aslan mentioned, is the same version of the typical rules that's played in Western Europe, but it's not as frequently played. It's considered to be more chance-paced and more boring, not as interesting to people. Interestingly, in Greece, for instance, they have the same attitude of this style of backgammon. So it seems to be a common perception of these particular rules for backgammon. One of the interesting, and you can hear the video of people playing, this version of the game is called Jul Bahar, which is basically just Seshbesh, but there's an interesting variation on how you play doubles. So if you throw doubles, you play all of the doubles that are possible going up to 6. So for instance, if you throw a double 1, you play the 1 4 times, then you play the 2 4 times, then the 3 4 times, the 4 4 times, the 5 4 times, and the 6 4 times. Which adds a lot more excitement. It gives a lot of it adds an element of chance into the game. And our informants told us that it often played for gambling. Especially. So we also talked to people about how they play checkers or drafts, which is known as shashki in Azerbaijan, which is the Russian word for checkers, but the actual Azerbaijani word is dama, which is more related to it's the name of this game in a lot of other languages as well. It's played on the 8x8 board with 12 pieces per player. Captures are mandatory, but you're not required to capture the maximum. And the promotion can happen in the middle of the turn, and it promotes the long king. What's interesting is it maintains the huff rule, which is something that was particularly popular, I believe, in the 17th century. Has kind of fallen out of favor in much of Western European chess, but this is checkers, sorry. But this is a rule where if you don't make a mandatory capture, your opponent calls you out and says, well, in English it used to be huff, but in Azerbaijan it would be fuk. If you don't capture, they say fuk, and then they take the piece that should have done the capturing. So it's kind of a penalty for not capturing correctly. what was interesting is when we were asking the people that we met on this, that we stopped on, like that one of those last days, the refugees from Karabakh, they play this, but they don't say fuk, they say poof when you miss the mandatory capture. But it also was the game was a little bit different also in Nakhchivan, where there was no huff rule. So if you miss your mandatory capture, your opponent just corrects you and then you play the way you should have. But also the king promotion is a little bit different, so that if you land in the middle of a sequence of captures on the end, you have to stop there to promote. So it's a little interesting nuance in the differences between the rules. And then what I was really particularly interested in finding in Azerbaijan was the rules for this Mancala style game that was in that ethnographic account from 1968 that I found, because Mancala games are not really well known from this part of the world. We have several from Turkey, and there are some from Central Asia as well, but had not really been documented very well in much of West Asia in recent times, and particularly in the Caucasus. So this ethnographic account didn't say where in Azerbaijan they documented it, but they said that it can be played with 2 or 4 players. Each player has 3 holes. In Mancala style games, the way you play is you have a number of counters in each of the holes, as you and the red dots here represent the counters that start in the holes. You pick all of them up and then you drop them one by one in a direction, and that's kind of how the sequence of moves, and like where you drop the last one is often important for how you capture your opponent's pieces. And so in this one, you pick them up, you sew the first one into the hole that you pick them up from, and you capture whenever the final hole has 2 or 4 in it, you capture all the counters, and then you play until you capture until all the counters are gone, and then you play in rounds. So then you fill up the holes again with however many counters you have. If you can't fill all of them up with 7, then you lose a hole, and then you continue to play until one player can't fill up any counters anymore. It's an interesting game, but we wanted to see, where else it might have been played. But we didn't really find in the ethnographic literature this exact set of rules. So we found another account that names this game Merachchtu from the Zangezur region, which is partially now in Azerbaijan, partially in Armenia. Didn't specify the direction that you sew them in, but that you do sew into the origin hole, and you do capture when the final hole is 2 or 4. So it's very similar to the one described before. It doesn't say if you play it in rounds like the previous one. Another version is called Kugmere, which means literally sheep dropping holes, because and we have a lot of versions of this game that use this name because they are played by shepherds, and they use dried sheep droppings because they're available to shepherds and they are of the right size to fit in a hole. The ethnographic account said that there were shepherd boys that played this game. They gave us the direction in which you sew them, but there's a little bit of a nuance from the other ethnographic account in that when your last counter falls in the hole to make a capture, you have to capture 2 before you can capture 4, or 4 before you can capture 6, etc. So more nuances on this game. Another version from an ethnographic account was was called Merakuyu Dibi, which I don't know what that means actually, but this doesn't give the direction. You can see it starts with a different number of pieces in the holes, and also has an interesting thing that's just unique to Mancala games that I have seen. I haven't seen this elsewhere, and I put about 300 of them into the Ludi database, is that there is kind of a reserve of counters in the middle, and when you start your turn, you take one from the reserve to start your sowing, which is an interesting nuance there. Another thing that we encountered was that there was somebody who was who was really interested in Mancala, and he said that he told us that he had talked to a couple of people in the western part of the country who also played the game, who called it Mera Mera on 2x6 holes, but didn't have many details about the rules for them for us. And what was really interesting was that we talked to many people and we were asking pretty much everybody we encountered who knew how to play this game, and most people didn't know how to play this game. We even stopped on the side of the road when we saw a shepherd and to ask him if he knew how to play because we had, all the ethnographic accounts were telling us that shepherds played this game. And he told us, no, the only game that I play is trying to guess which of my sheep is going to give birth first. So, but luckily on this last, those refugees from Karabakh, who were playing Nard there, luckily when we stopped by, they actually knew a version of this, and one of them had played it when he was a kid, when he was a shepherd, a boy, watching the herds. So he gave us the overall sense of how to play the game. There was an inconsistency. So this is how the board looks. These are how many counters go in the hole. He said that you start with a stylized move where you sow starting from the leftmost hole, and then you should go all the way around, and it should end in the opponent's last hole. But this numerically just doesn't work. So his description of the game in that sense didn't work, but he did provide other rules that do work. So basically, you sow into the origin hole, and then when you sow your last one into any of the rows, any of the holes in the opponent's row, you capture all of those. So it was so we were able to get an account, and it is different from the other ones, which is interesting. But we also got a description of this game from Raphael, who talked to us about the equestrian games. He also knew about this game, this version of it, which is completely unique to any of the other Mancala games that I had ever encountered. So basically, it's more of a dexterity game. So each player has 12 stones or sheep droppings, and basically it's a race. So you drop them one at a time really fast, going to one end and then back to the other end. And whoever can do that first wins that round. Any of the others that are in the opponent's row that only have one counter in them, by the time you're done, you get to capture those, and then they lose holes. And this goes on until you basically capture all of the counters. It's a completely unique style of playing this game that I had not heard of anywhere else. But what's interesting is trying to investigate whether some of the stuff that we saw at Gobustan and in other places could relate to these games. The ones at Yazla Tepe that had the circles, you'll remember they had a circle of 12 and a circle of 9, which are multiples of 3. All of these ethnographic accounts basically tell us that these games usually have a multiple of 3. Usually it's that each player has 3 holes that belong to them. Could it be that these were later, these are games that were played at in this place? I think it's likely because of that, but also because of the location, because as we kept hearing that they were shepherd boys, people playing games as they are watching their flocks. It's a great location to sit on top of this rock and survey the land and let your sheep do what they're going to do. But there are also some other objects that look like this that are from antiquity, such as this one that we saw in the Stone Museum in Azerbaijan, that are they're a similar pattern, but they're probably not for this game. First of all, the holes are not big enough. The number isn't correct, so something is probably going on there, and you can have objects that look similar but have two different functions. So I would suggest that these are the two on top of the rock here in Yazla Tepe might be versions of this game that were played later in time, but some of the Bronze Age and earlier stuff that looks like this are probably something else. So just to quickly give a little broader context, Seshpesh is a game that is played elsewhere, even though it's not super popular in all other places. It's similar to Greek Fevga. Julbahar also has a version that's known in Bulgaria. I've seen references to it in Greece and Turkey, but not really any good quality references. There's also a game in Piperjal named Piperjal in Iceland where it's similar, but the weird dice thing goes in the opposite direction. I also had an opportunity in Georgia on the way back to talk about backgammon there with somebody, and they only play the version that we play in Western Europe, so they play completely differently, even though it's a neighboring country. And many of the players that we talked to said that they can't play with people in Turkey because they play completely different rules. Shashki is very similar to the Russian rules, but there's a completely different style of checkers that's played in Turkey and Armenia, or was at least in the 20th century, that is completely different from these. So there's something interesting going on there. Perhaps it has more to do with the Soviet influence. And the Mancala style games are very different. There's some similarities with some Turkish versions, but they're completely different from the Central Asian games. And because these aren't like super popular and it's not a huge game, you have so many variations of rules because the player communities are so small. And then who knows when the Merrill's games were played. There also was one recently found as Rock Art in Georgia, and then Mirjavid, who is also in GameTable, just days after I left Azerbaijan, sent a picture to us of one that he found in an archaeological excavation dating to the 11th century. So that backs up the 11th century one that we found in that was referenced at Tigranikart. We found some other historical references that we need to read through that talk about the history of chess and nard in Azerbaijan. There are lots of famous historical authors who are noted chess players and wrote about them. Be interesting to see what they write about the rules, if anything. We have some articles planned, and yeah, that's it. So there's the bibliography we have, and we want to thank many people that that helped us out. And yeah, and as I said, GameTable funded this research. It was part of a short-term scientific mission. And thank you all for coming and listening to me talk very long about all of this.